Hello, everybody. This is Monday Night Pod. Tyler and Fensky. We're going to be continuing our series tonight in Psalm 60, focusing on the sons of Zeruiah, with the emphasis tonight on Joab.
So we talked about three different aspects of Joab's life and things we can learn from it. Joab was the commander of the army for the entirety of David's kingship, and this was David's nephew, right? So this was his sister's son. Okay, and the first thing we looked at tonight was just his failings. And he had two major ones where, starting in 2 Samuel chapter 2, this battle of Gibeon, Abner, who is the commander of Israel's army. So remember, there's civil war at this time. David has been anointed king over Judah, but then the surviving son of Saul, Ishbosheth, is now the king over House of Saul. Israel follows the House of Saul. Then you got David, okay? And says the war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Kicks off with this battle of Gibeon, where at it, Abner, the commander of Israel's army, kills Joab's brother, Asahel. Now, this was in battle, okay? And we talked about that tonight, just, that there is provision for war in the Bible, right? That in the current state that we're in here on planet Earth, which is a fallen world, that's part of life on planet Earth at this stage. Okay, we know that even in the millennium, that it will be different, right? Because it says that in Micah and Isaiah, that they will not train for war anymore, right? For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Okay, so when Jesus comes back, that's going to be different. And then when new heaven and new earth, the old order of things to pass away. But in this current fallen state of earth, sometimes war is necessary, okay? And there's provision for that. There's not provision for murder, okay, but there is provision for killing in war, right? And that's what happens here. So Abner kills Joab's brother Asahel in war at this battle of Gibeon, okay? But then Joab's response in 2 Samuel chapter 3 is that he then murders Abner over this, okay? And David did not know about this, okay? So Joab stabs Abner and kills him. It says, later when David heard about this, he said, I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. And he curses Joab over this. He says, may his blood fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house. May Joab's house never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy or who leans on a crutch or who falls by the sword or who lacks food. So once again, that just distinction between, as we see in Romans 13, where it talks about that the government does not bear the sword for nothing. So that is something that governments can then execute is war. Okay, and then the killing that is within war. What Joab's doing here is he's murdering Abner, as David later says, killing him in peacetime as if in battle. Yeah. So a key distinction there. And then ultimately what Joab gets for this from David is the death penalty. And we talked about that tonight as well, that from Romans 13, that is something that if the government so chooses to do, can execute the death penalty. Right?
Yeah, and a lot of people, you talk about that tonight as well, where, the pro-life, pro-choice debate comes up, and they're like, right. They try to get you on that. How can you be pro-life and also be pro the death penalty? Well, the difference is, one is a baby's innocent. Right. It hasn't done anything wrong. And biblically, the death penalty should only be instituted if someone has committed murder. Murder, right?
They're a murderer.
Premeditated, right? Meaning this wasn't an accident. It wasn't in an emotional state. I planned this and I executed, much like Joab does here, right? And that's a big distinction. One of the things I actually didn't think it during the teaching, but just right now it hit me. The difference between Joab and David, where it's like David, instead of trying to take revenge into his own hands, many, many times over, he says the Lord's revenge to avenge, right? It's the Lord who will repay. It's the Lord who will judge. It's the Lord who will handle this. Where Joab, you brought up tonight, he did not handle grief well at all, and he didn't have the right perspective on this at all, right? This is war. It's not like someone, it's not like there was innocent bloodshed on the behalf of his brother. Right. This was battle, right? And his brother got taken in battle, right? And so Joab, instead of having the mindset that David did over and over, where he had love for his enemies, he prayed for his enemies, he left it in the Lord's hands, even though David had the power and the authority to execute capital punishment, many times he chose not to, right? We'll find he later did with Joab through his son. However, it just hit me that if Joab had the same heart as David, he wouldn't have caused all these problems for himself. Maybe he could have either forgiven or handled it correctly, or waited until it was wartime to go after him, and that shows kind of the downfall, not having the perspective of the Lord and in taking things into your own hands.
Yeah, and it makes that clear in 2 Samuel 3, verse 30, where it says Joab and his brother Abishai. So Abishai was involved in this at some level, murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle at Gibeon. Right now, this battle at Gibeon, if you follow this through in chapter 2, so it says that Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was setting, they came to the hill of Ammah near Giah on the way to the wasteland of Gibeon. This is verse 24. Then the men of Benjamin rallied behind Abner, and they formed themselves into a group and took their stand on top of a hill. Then Abner calls out to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize that this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their brothers?" Joab answered, "As surely as God lives, if you had not spoken, the men would have continued the pursuit of their brothers until morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men came to a halt. They no longer pursued Israel, nor did they fight anymore. So then Abner and his men march away, Joab and his men march away. So it's like an amicable end to this day. And they knew that Abner had killed Asahel, because it notes that in verse 23, every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. Okay, but then later Joab comes back and murders Abner, right? So, we talk about just that grief process, and, that's clearly coming forth here, where sure. he never just kind of reconciled himself to what had happened, Yeah.
And this is a side note, but the Bible calls us as believers, we're not supposed to grieve as the world grieves. You know what I'm saying? And that would have served Joab well here to at least avoid this,
right?
This shortcoming, this failure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And we brought up tonight too just the aspect of where Jesus says in Matthew 26. Where he says those who draw the sword will die by the sword, right? So we're not talking about wartime here. We're talking about exactly with what Joab did there, right? Where he's committing murder, right? So then if you flip forward to 1 Kings chapter 2 here. So this is David on his deathbed. Okay, and the first thing he says, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. "I'm about to go the way of all the earth," he said. "So be strong, show yourself a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in his ways and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and requirements, as written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go." So that's the first thing he tells him here is verse 2 through 4. Then here's the second thing. "Now you yourself know what Joab son of Zeruiah did to me, what he did to the two commanders of Israel's armies, Abner son of Ner and Amasa son of Jether." Now the second case, because this happened twice. So after they put down this conspiracy by Absalom, David announces that Amasa is now going to be commander-in-chief over the armies instead of Joab. Joab does almost the exact same thing where he stabs Amasa, says he didn't even stab him twice, just once, he bleeds out and dies. Leaves him there on the road just wallowing in his own blood. So it wasn't just Abner that he murdered another guy almost in the same position, right? Amasa son of Jether, the two commanders of Israel's armies, right? He killed them, shedding their blood in peacetime as if in battle, and with that blood stained the belt around his waist and the sandals on his feet. That's an important note, because you can see that if there's not justice, that does create problems. Okay, absolutely. I referenced this tonight, we didn't have the time for it, but if you go to 2 Samuel 21, I think this is one of the many examples of this. So it says, "During the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 consecutive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. The Lord said, 'It is on account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death.'" So because of this wrong thing that Saul did, many years later, there was a famine over this. 3 consecutive years. They can't figure out why this famine is going on. Here's their answer: because there had not been justice done with the Gibeonites. So then justice has to be carried out. And then it says that after that, God answered prayer in behalf of the land, verse 14.
Yeah.
Right? So that's an important point that justice has to be done. Why? Because the Lord loves justice. Psalm chapter 11.
Yep.
Okay? And David now is going to tell Solomon, says, deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. So David's saying, Joab's going to get the death penalty for this.
Yeah.
Right? And that's going to be justice for it, as Solomon then says. Tells Benaniah to strike him down and bury him, and so clear me and my father's house of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed. The Lord will repay him for the blood he shed, because without the knowledge of my father David, he attacked 2 men and killed them with the sword. Both of them, Abner son of Ner, commander of Israel's army, and Amasa son of Jether, commander of Judah's army, were better men and more upright than he. May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. But on David and his descendants, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever. So there's the aspect of the execution of capital punishment there, where Benaniah son of Jehoiada goes out and strikes down Job, verse 34, right? And that's exactly what you see the Lord saying there, where if you draw by the sword,
You die by the
right?
sword.
Draw the sword, you will die by the sword, because that provision is then given to the government in Romans 13, where it has the authority to do that, right? For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer.
Absolutely. It gives you insight into how serious the Lord takes murder, right? Because the Lord has certain plans to be accomplished through people's lives, and for you to just take that prematurely, right? The Lord doesn't take too kindly to that, and he wants to detract people from doing that as much as possible, right? And a lot of what you were talking about reminded me of a lot of Proverbs, where it talks about the people crying and whenever justice isn't served by their government, or justice isn't taken out by their king, or they're not ruled in a godly manner, right? And so that just shows the importance of why David eventually came to that decision. It might be a pod for another week of why he waited till that point to make that decision, but that shows kind of the Lord's will through just capital punishment and murder overall. Yeah. How he deals with injustices, for sure.
Yeah, and that's you mentioned that it's you're looking at. Because it notes that he reigned in Hebron for 7 years, right? And then overall Israel for 33, right? So we're looking at 40 years. Well, Joab's there the whole time.
Yeah.
Right from jump in that civil war. So 40 years he's having this working relationship with Joab. You're not going to always get to work with perfect people. Yep. That was our second point tonight, is that people bring problems. They're complicated. They're flawed. They're sinful,
many ways.
We all stumble in many ways, as it says in James 3, right? So it's like, so Joab is, does have these problems, does fail in 2 major ways, right? But it's not like, David is still working with him this whole time, and Joab has successes. Yeah. Right? Joab is the one who leads the attack on Jerusalem. Yeah. Okay, and is given the command over the army for that. Mm-hmm. Okay, all the different battles that we read through a couple weeks ago, right? That's where we're at in the Psalms right now, where, Joab in striking down the Edomites in the Valley of Salt, right? So David's working with just a flawed person, right? But people as flawed as they are, that's also people bring creativity, ideas, innovation, encouragement, love, right? Can't do it by yourself, right? So you're getting both ends of the spectrum when you deal with people. Yeah. Right, the key takeaway is not to expect too much out of them, not thinking that they're going to be perfect. They're not. Yep. Right, they're not going to be perfect.
You made a great point tonight. He who has been forgiven little loves little, right? Mm-hmm. And he who's been forgiven much loves much, right? And so one of the biggest takeaways I took from tonight is on this point is you're not going to work with perfect people, but that doesn't have to be an excuse. Right. Right. I think about Joseph and how he worked with Pharaoh and how the Lord used Pharaoh to bless him. Right. You're not always going to have perfect people. You're not always going to have believers, but that doesn't shorten the arm of the Lord. Correct. Right. If you would just be faithful to whom the Lord has given you, and over the people that the Lord's given you, if you would just be faithful over that, then the Lord can do something with it, right? And you can maximize it all, right? But don't think that just because this person has this problem or they're this way or that way and it doesn't jive with how you are, like the Lord put them there for a reason, right? Sharpen them, right? Be faithful with them, right? And see what the Lord can do. David could have let this be the end, right? He was not happy with Joab after that first killing, right?
Yes.
Over Abner. He was not happy about it. Later on, you had 33 years of successful reign, right? You had many campaigns that Joab led for him and won for him, right? So the ability to forgive, like you pointed out tonight, David was a man after the Lord's own heart, right? And letting that filter through how you treat people, we could get a lot of wisdom out of that.
Yeah. And then the final point we went over tonight was just in the interaction of Joab and David when it came to David's failing when it came to Bathsheba.
Yep.
Okay, because when it came to Uriah the Hittite, so the sequence here, to quickly review this, so once again, David should have been going off with Joab and the army. Mm-hmm. He doesn't. Yep. Stays in Jerusalem. Now sees this woman, is told that she's married, still acts on it. Then gets very complicated because she gets pregnant, right? Now he brings back the husband from the battlefield, Uriah the Hittite, thinking that he's going to sleep with her and then think it's his kid. Okay, Uriah doesn't. Next night, makes him drunk. Uriah still doesn't. Then, in the morning, verse 14, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. And then it notes in verse 17 that's exactly what happened. Joab sends David a full account of the battle. And if you read through these verses here, Joab's referencing something from the book of Judges, noting to David he does understand tactics. He's not incompetent, but the whole reason that these guys fell and the battle didn't go well today was for the purpose of killing Uriah. So this was the whole battle plan for the day, was to get Uriah killed as David had instructed him. This was not, this didn't fall on Joab. Okay, when Nathan rebukes David about this and confronts him, says, you struck down Uriah with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. So Joab is just following orders here. But I would also note that in 1 Chronicles 21, when it comes to the census, and post-Absalom in 2 Samuel 19, you both see instances where Joab does push back on David a little bit. So this wasn't a yes sir, no sir relationship. There was, interaction between where Joab could speak up. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like just, okay. And in this instance, when David really needed him to do that, right? To open this letter and be like, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. This is the battle plan for the day? Because Uriah's going to die, one of your 30 mighty men. And others are going to fall with him, verse 17. All for the purpose of killing Uriah. Why are we killing Uriah in the first place? Mm-hmm. What's actually going on here? What's... And questioning this, he follows through on it, right? And really what I took away out of this is just that, what David had, that asset that he had going for him was his character, right? Man after God's own heart. Yeah. And we see how negative things went when he wasn't following through on his character, right? When he's thinking with just, as we talked about weeks back, just thinking with lust, instead of just logically looking at this and sticking with his integrity and his character, right? He's just consumed by, this lust, gets trapped and ends up with just these severe consequences for it, right? But even the sin that he committed to this point, okay, it didn't have to be compounded then with the murder of Uriah the Hittite, okay? If Joab could have maybe stepped up and say, hey, what's going on here? But what you got going on is David, who is not operating in his character and integrity, and now paired with somebody who is dealing with his own guilt and dealing with his own major issues and is a ruthless person himself. Yeah. And then you put that together and it's just disaster. Yeah. And then David has the callousness to say, say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. this could happen to anybody. Well, this was not by happenstance on the battlefield.
Yeah.
This was by intention, right? You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites, as Nathan then tells David.
Yeah. Bad company corrupts good character, right? And it's so interesting to me because this thought is just hitting me. If you go by what the Lord commanded the Israelites to do when it came to murder, right? So if someone murders someone, unjustly, what's supposed to happen to them, right? That's not carried out with Joab immediately, right? Like he kind of more or less gets away with it, in some ways, right? Just more or less because he's in with David.
Right.
And you see, and I don't know if that should have happened, right? And it's just me thinking out loud.
It's really tough to tell.
I'm not here to say it should have.
Right.
But it's interesting how, justice, according to the Lord, right? The Lord's standard. And I can empathize with David. I probably would have done the same thing. According to the Lord's standard, it wasn't dealt with immediately. And so it progresses to the point where David has somebody to follow through on this, right? Because he recognizes, okay, he's a murderer. He'll this follows suit with his character, right? He'll be my hitman. He'll be my he'll do the dirty work for me. And
that's a good point.
That's just an interesting thought to me. But understanding, and you made a great point tonight with this, is you want people in your life that balance you out.
Yes.
Right. So if I'm a lustful person, I don't want to run with somebody who's only going to compound that. If I have a anger problem or I have to solve it myself problem, justice has to be avenged in my own hands. A murderous heart, right? Because Jesus says, if you curse your brother, you've already committed murder, right?
Yes.
So it starts there,
right?
He was cursing Abner, and that seed took forth into him murdering him. If I run with somebody like that, it's only a matter of time before either I commit murder myself or I have them do it for me, you know? And it's important for us to have the heart of, it talks in the New Testament about a Pharisee who goes and says, oh, I'm so thankful, I'm so perfect, and I'm not like these people and have their sins. And then the lady comes and just says, hey, Lord, forgive me, I'm the worst of sinners, right? It'd be better for us to have that attitude, right? Like, Lord, who am I? These are all the things I need to get right with you and check myself on. But recognizing, if I have this problem, I want to be around somebody who's going to sharpen me and help me get better. If I'm not a peaceful person, like you said, I need to be around peaceful people. If I'm not naturally a loving person, it'd be good for me to be around somebody who is loving. Yeah. Right. And so understanding, people aren't perfect, but hopefully you surround yourself with people to where sin's not just going to compound. Right.
Yeah. And this is Psalm 141. We're in Psalm 60.
Yes.
Right now. So this is probably years off, but we'll eventually be covering this. But Psalm 141. Right, David says, let not my heart be drawn to what is evil, to take part in wicked deeds with men who are evildoers. Let me not eat of their delicacies. Let a righteous man strike me. It is a kindness. Mm-hmm. Let him rebuke me. It is oil on my head. My head will not refuse it. When we eventually get to Psalm 141, we'll go in deep on that, right? But that's such a great verse because it's like, please put people around me that will rebuke me. Yes. Yeah. Right, because once again, if you love me, then you will step in and say, hey, what are we doing here? And what's going on here? If you don't love me, then yes, you take the selfish route and you avoid confrontation. It's just like, oh yeah, whatever you want to do, that's fine. Yeah, I'll support you no matter what. That's not a loving person. That is not love. That is just, I'm protecting myself and being selfish, and I'd rather just not deal with any type of confrontation or disagreement. So, oh yeah, whatever. Right? Do whatever. I support you in whatever. That's not love. Right? Love would be, let a righteous man strike me. It is a kindness. Let him rebuke me. It is oil on my head. My head will not refuse it. Love gets dirty, right? It gets in your business. And will confront you on things because they care about you. If somebody loves you, they'll confront you on things because they care about you. What you're getting here with Joab and David, like you're saying, is, Joab is that guy who is a little, he is ruthless and he's got this murder on his conscience and he's not always making the right decisions. And it's like, okay, if you put a David around him, that relationship is working well. But then when David is not acting in his character, now you really got problems because it's just two ruthless dudes. And it's just like, yeah, that's the battle plan for the day. We're going to kill one of our own.
One of the 30 mighty men.
One of the 30 mighty men in this army.
Yeah.
Right? And others are falling with him. And Joab's just thinking, make sure that David knows that I do understand tactics. The only reason it went bad today was to make sure that Uriah died. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, there's some points to learn there. And the takeaway that we tried to finish tonight with was that, you're going to be around imperfect people. You're going to work with them. You're going to play with them, plan with them, even marry imperfect people, right? But the key is just to see them as Jesus did. And this is Matthew 9:36. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And that verse to me is so poignant because you see a lot of people with a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion right now. It's not coming from God, for God's not the author of confusion. Right? So you see just just Satan at work where people are just so confused and discouraged and depressed mentally, so much anger. You don't even have to look for it, right? Just, it's all over the internet, right? But a lot of people are just harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, right? It says that he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." So it's like when you're meeting people and it's like, it's your job's not to judge them, right? God will judge those outside the church, 1 Corinthians 5. So your job is not to judge them. Your job is not to try to make them morally perfect and then say that they can somehow come to God. There's no way to affect that anyways, right? They're going to have a heart transplant, right? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Okay. Nor is your job to just demean them or look down on them or try to be right over them or argue with them. Seems to be a big thing now, right? I'm going to just prove that I'm smarter than this other person and show how dumb they are and how, stupid they are with the way they see things. Right? Instead, have compassion on them. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field.
Yeah, just a few verses ahead of that, in chapter 9, on hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." And so what I get out of that, and verse 36 on, is understand people are people. They're fallen, but the Lord desires everybody to be saved. And the Lord has a preferred will for everybody. And, he'd like to plant seeds, right? And if you would just ask, he'll show you the field to where those seeds can be planted and harvested, and hopefully a crop can be produced, And so just understanding, people are sick, they come with their baggage. You do, I do, everyone does. How can I help? How can I have the heart of the Lord and have an impact on them and speak life, speak the gospel to them, that has hope and there's truth that can change their trajectory for eternity, right? I heard it said recently that, for someone to spend eternity away from the Lord, they have to deny every billboard, every tract, every interaction they have with the believer, every gospel presentation they've ever encountered to lead there. There's many opportunities if only we would ask the Lord, like he's saying here, and take advantage of them, right? So people don't have to be perfect, like you said, and you might be forced to work with people who aren't perfect. That's fine. Try to be in character yourself, like David was when things were going successful. and the Lord's will be done that much greater. So that's the Monday Night Pod. This week, focus on the sons of Zeruiah, focusing on Joab. We'll continue the series with the sons of Zeruiah next week. Hope everyone has a blessed week. Again, this is a Monday Night Pod. Tyler and Fensky.